Hi, my name is Austin Chadwick, and welcome to the Mom Mentality Show. Co-host is Chris Lucian, and today we are very excited to have Jeff Cheezy on the show. This is kind of a fanboy moment for me a little bit. I did watch Jeff's Clean Coder series with him and Uncle Bob and Declan. Is that right? Who
Yeah,
else? Yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
Yep.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So. Got to watch you three mob on what was it, Elixir? I'm trying to remember
Yep.
the
Sure
yeah.
was. Yep.
Yeah, it was good time, good conversations. I learned a lot from watching that. But we have Jeff on today to talk about several things that he's passionate about, including continuous delivery, quality without QA, and even coffee and croissants. But before we jump into those, Jeff, do you mind giving an introduction of yourself?
Sure. Sure. Jeff Morgan is the full name, but probably most of your listeners know me as Cheesy. So I'm been a developer since I guess my gray hair is going to give it away since the 80s, and I've done a lot of uh, uh, worked in many languages, I guess. The late 90s, I was working at a place where they brought in some thought worker consultants, and I first heard of Agile type things, and latched on to XP and have been an XPer ever since then. Um, as things have evolved, I've kind of moved more into the continuous delivery type of work and effort, and I've been a consultant in that space for around 20 years or so, I guess. So that's me.
Right on. Very good. So I guess just jumping into it. Yeah, what are you passionate about in continuous delivery these days? Yeah.
Well, I'm passionate about delivering amazing products, right? So that's the first thing.
Mhm.
And as a developer, we sometimes think that we don't really have a hand in that. We think that that's somebody else is making a lot of those decisions, but in the continuous delivery space, we really do have a big role to play there. I'm pretty excited about that. And uh, the for many years now, what I have done is work with companies of all sorts and sizes to let them see how that can happen, how we can actually deliver a higher quality product, deliver the right thing. And a lot of that work has been working with developers, teaching them how to write good code, which is not the most common thing out there these days. So anyway, but I'm pretty passionate about that, and so yeah.
Good. Yeah, so at least for me, I came from early parts of my career where it was not continuous delivery.
Hmm.
And so
Yes.
I got to experience what that was like. And
Hmm.
so once I experienced continuous delivery, which for me was really correlated very highly with pairing and mobbing.
Hmm.
Um, it was quite a jarring experience in a very positive sense, and where I became very addicted. Yeah, maybe what was your prior experiences like before the continuous delivery experiences?
Yeah. So I like you. Well, starting in the 80s, the whole concepts of agile, the whole concepts of even pair programming, none of this was around, right? And so for the first couple of decades of my career, I primarily worked in telecom. And for a period of that time, I was writing software that was running inside of telephone switches or dumb switches. And so it was a lot of really low level Linux, or well, Unix at that time, and then later Linux code. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth in C. And later, eventually, the company I was working for decided object oriented is the way to go. So they put me through C++ training, and I enjoyed C++. Followed the Java craze eventually, and did a lot of Ruby as well. In fact, I've authored many Ruby gems that have had a lot of downloads, and since then I just had an explosion of languages. So that's kind of on the programming side of things. As I mentioned, in late 90s, actually 99 to be specific, we were running down trying to fix the Y2K problem. I don't know if any of your listeners will remember that, but that was like a real thing, right? So We were worried that the world was going to blow up. And so we brought in some consultants to kind of help us with that. And lo and behold, the company we reached out to was ThoughtWorks. And so they came in, they helped us with that, but they started bringing in ideas, and most of them were coming in from out of town, and they stayed at a hotel together. And every Wednesday night they had a poker game there. And so I started going to their poker games. And of course, with all of the fun that happens at the poker games, we started talking about XP. They turned me on to that idea, that way of thinking. And I spent the rest of that engagement just trying to soak up as much uh, knowledge as I can from these guys, trying to learn everything I possibly could. And once they left, I became the evangelist at the company where I was. Pair programming was a huge part of it. And probably about 3 years later, this would be around 2002, 2003, I left the company to help other companies learn these ideas. And so that's kind of my path to Agile, I guess you could say. And you know, the manifesto says we're learning better ways of doing things, right? So along the way, we had the Lean Startup that came out. We had, BDD and Dan North and all of his ideas, and we just kept growing and kept getting better. And then some of the early uh things that eventually turned into DevOps started appearing. And so I just continued to stay on that cutting technical edge, just trying to see how can I push further? How can I do better? How can I, deliver higher quality? How can I get my software to a point where, it's releasable at any moment? And that kind of led me to continuous delivery.
Mm.
Mob programming, though, was a little bit different approach. So I first heard about mob programming from a friend of mine and said, "Hey, have you heard of this idea?" And I'm ashamed to say that my initial reaction to it was probably how I envision a lot of people's initial reaction whenever they hear about pair programming. I'm like, "What? A whole team? That, and here I am pairing every day, and I'm like, wait a minute. How's that going to work?" And at that time, I was speaking 10, 12 times a year at conferences. And it was only about a month and a half or two later that I was speaking at a conference where Woody was. And so I had a chance to sit down and talk to him, and Luell was there as well. And so we had some good conversations. And at that point, I'm like, well, I really got to give this a try. And so I happened to be working with a really, really great team at that time. And I brought the idea to the team. And they said, okay, let's figure this out. And we had some rough starts. We weren't sure how to do it, but eventually we figured it out, and it was amazing. And so since that time, whenever I go in and work with new teams, I find that the best way for me to help them is by mobbing. So, the best way for me to help the developers learn how to write better code is to be on the keyboard with them, be on the keyboard, everybody together, and they're going to say, wow, what did you do? How did you do that? And we talk about it, and to bring the product person there so that they can start to see the pieces and parts materialize and really get involved in that just in time kind of discussion around, the which experiment are we running, or what our expectations are for the next couple of days. And so that's kind of my history with mobbing.
Yeah. So, kind of speaking about continuous delivery and
Mhm.
mobbing, I guess what impacts did you see going from, mainly pairing to mobbing in regards to continuous delivery?
Yeah. I guess what one of the challenges with uh, continuous delivery is continuous integration, right? So
Right.
so I mean, it just is. And once you go up to larger organizations where you've got, multiple teams possibly working on the same software, trying to keep, all of the changes from blasting everybody else out, and obviously there's lots of different types of tests and testing harnesses and things you can put in place to help with that. But once you start mobbing, that seems to get one of the things that I've observed is that that gets simpler. So let's say you have a team of 5 developers times three teams, right? So instead of having 15 paths, if you will, you've got 3 paths through the code. So it's just continuous integration gets a little bit simpler. It gets easier. Obviously, communication is much tighter. So whenever I'm working in continuous delivery mode, it usually is about experimentation, right? So it usually is about, defining what's the next experiment, what's our expectation, what data do we, that do we need to monitor, what do we need to capture, what do we think are, the significant breakpoints in that data. And those are usually conversations that developers can lead, but that product folks have to be intimately involved with. And having the product folks involved in the mob allow us to have those conversations kind of in real time, as opposed to the traditional, let's hand off that, or heaven forbid, let's write something in Jira or some crazy tool like that, right? So I find from that perspective, it works well as well. For me personally, a lot of what I'm doing is helping teams learn to do this well, which means learn to write code well, learn to think in small steps, learn to have everything tested all of the time, right? So whenever I'm kind of in the role of a teacher, if you will, a lot of the time. And whenever I'm in that mode, mobbing helps me give everybody the same message. And it helps me also get the different team members to help each other, and so it works really well for me from that perspective, because I'm seeing everybody, which in today's world where a lot of us are remote, that's not even as easy, but it works from that perspective, from a teaching perspective, because I can give everybody the same message. I could see if somebody's struggling, I could sense it, and I could see if somebody's doing well, or grokking it well, and I can say, hey Joe, why don't you help Sam, with that idea, and so those are some of the big observations I guess I'll bring around mobbing.
Yeah, recently I made like a proof of concept that is fairly complicated, and last couple of days actually I joined a mob who is taking it over, and it's just so cool, like the iterations on I do, we do, you do sort of stuff, like all kinds of stuff can just go really smoothly, and so it's a really fun experience
Nice.
for sure.
Yeah,
Nice.
absolutely.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and I think kind of asking the other side of the coin, because um, it's been great hearing about what things are going well. I guess in the space of continuous delivery and mobbing or anything in that world, what are your current biggest struggles or problems you're trying to solve?
Um, well, I don't think there are any struggles or problems in that space. That space is pretty well worn now. I mean, Fred
Yeah.
George kind of cut that space back in what, 2004, 3, something like that. But I don't really have any challenge other than the constant. Actually, okay, you made me think of one. Sorry,
Good.
so DevOps, the idea of DevOps has moved from let's empower our developers so that they can freaking go as fast as possible, to let's create a centralized organization with the goal of protecting the company from the developers.
Yeah.
So I guess something that has happened in a lot of more corporate type environments is DevOps is being used as a tool to kill productivity instead of what it was originally intended, which is let's give the developers the tools, the things that they need so that they can deliver software every couple of hours. And
Right.
so that's a little frustrating, to be quite honest. But I whenever I get in organizations where they're working in such a way, sometimes I've been able to influence that and help those ideas, and sometimes that's been by joining the DevOps team and helping them know and understand, and helping them learn to release their product, if you will, in more of a continuous delivery fashion, and so forth. But sometimes also, if it's too crazy, it's time for me to move on. I don't have time to play around with those organizations who don't want to really do it.
It's almost like the organizations that want the and sometimes it comes from the developers and sometimes it comes from the business, but it's like we need a separate testing team because I don't write my own tests. I don't do my own testing.
Yeah.
It's a waste of my brain, right? When
Oh
you
God.
encounter that, it's just very cringy. And
Hmm.
I think the same thing. It's like if it's I'm not going to do my own DevOps or that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Whether it's influenced by the organization or the developer, I think it can be very, very challenging in those environments. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It
So
reminds me of oh, go ahead, Jeff. Yep.
I was just going to say that sometimes those organizations are a little bit open, and I'll give you an example of a client I worked with not too long ago, where they had a centralized DevOps team, and the DevOps team owned the pipeline. Okay, so if a team wanted to make a change, they had to put in a request, and of course it would take freaking forever. Sometimes by the time they would get around to making the change, it was too late, or we couldn't even remember why we asked for it, So what a bad situation. But I worked with the DevOps team. First of all, they had a quality problem, and so I taught them how to write tests in Groovy, and how to actually sort of put some test harnesses around what they were. And then eventually I convinced them to internally open source, if you will, their scripts, which was such that, instead of them having to make all of the changes, if my team needed to make a change, we could just simply create a pull request. I could make a change, create a pull request. I
Nice.
can, document it, tell them why. And so it was a step in the right direction, not as far as I would have liked to have gone, but those sort of things make a difference, I guess.
Nice. Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's great. And so that's always fun when you can this quote unquote DevOps team. Like I've definitely seen that pattern before too, where
Yeah.
the thing we're trying to combine, we're actually separating. But yeah, mobbing is a fascinating experiment in any type of work isolation, whether it's testing, whether it's QA, whether it's operations, whether it's
Hmm.
pipelines and all that kind of stuff, is because if you throw a mobber into the midst of that and these
Hmm.
somehow they start pairing or mobbing with that team,
Hmm.
what I've noticed is naturally the mobber will start trying to get the whole system in the room, and then you'll quickly find all the organizational antibodies to lean,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because you're like,
Yes. Yes.
hey, oh, so we can't update that pipeline unless we put in a ticket. Can't we just go talk to them? And then you like try to pull them into the mob and make the mob with you, and you find out if that gets destroyed or if
Hmm.
that works, and then you start having flow efficiency, and then you start pulling people into the team where everyone who is needed is there, and then you start actually doing real DevOps.
Right. Then you're back to no longer having a department, right? So
Yeah,
that's how
exactly.
it was intended.
But yeah, it is interesting sometimes because when you try to do that, everyone is, get quite upset with you. And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. Cool. Maybe one other follow-up question before we pivot to quality without QA, because that'd be a fascinating topic. I noticed that you kind of attached yourself, at least for this conversation, primarily to the term continuous delivery,
Hmm.
and as opposed to saying agile or opposed to saying XP or something else. Yeah, what draws you to that title more than others, I suppose, to kind of make it the primary
Hmm.
thing in some regard. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started this path with Agile, as I mentioned, or XP, and the thing is that I started learning and being influenced by a lot of other people in the community, and if we look back at the original XP, great, a lot of those practices are still foundational, without a doubt. But there's so many new things that we have learned since then, right? And the idea of DevOps didn't exist, not really. The idea of lean startup didn't exist. The idea of experimentation didn't exist. That there was just so much that I mean, feature toggles. I mean, I can go on and on and on and just name many things that didn't exist at that time. And so the I I think that I've sort of evolved beyond just the original XP. I'm greatly influenced by that. Agile itself has become a a muddy place, in that I really don't go to too many Agile conferences just because they become just sales opportunities for really large consulting companies who have no idea what Agile really is or what the original concepts or ideas were. I think we've lost the original intent. And so uh, a lot, I can talk to people and I say Agile and I can see them think, oh my God, I had a Scrum Master who used to force me to do X, and so forth. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to be a part of that. When I'm working with a team as well, I really don't bring Agile per se. I try to get the tiniest, lightest weight kind of Kanban type approach in that I possibly can, so I just don't really like that Agile label because I think it doesn't fit me. And I think that label carries too much negative baggage these days.
Mm.
The distinction between, big A Agile versus little A Agile,
That's
that
right.
sort of thing, right? And having to
That's right.
explain all that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I do find, I think I agree with you. I do find that talking about extreme programming and Kanban is
Mhm.
easier. But also, I'm in a manufacturing context, so
Mhm.
talking to people about lean has
Mhm.
ended
Yep.
up benefiting me more. But um, yeah, so it's pretty interesting. But I think that's kind of where things are going these days because I think I go to a lot of Agile conferences, and in each of
Mhm.
those conferences lately, everybody's like, should we even be calling this Agile anymore? So it's very,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, I think it's a sign of the times a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, well, yeah, let's jump to quality without QA. What were you thinking here?
I spent years trying to figure out what to do with QA. Okay. I mean, this was something that was kind of quiet in the early days of Agile and XP. They didn't really talk about it, so everyone was trying to figure out what should we do with them. And I have I met some folks and became close friends with some people who came from the QA background, Elizabeth Hendrickson, Lisa Crispin, a few others who
Right.
I have a lot of respect for, and the work that they've done modernizing that portion of the industry. But I went down paths of trying to think about, well, can we teach them to write code? Can we teach them to write, automation? And I taught lots of classes in that area, I wrote a book that was kind of this targeting designing for those folks, and we would have limited success, and so forth. But things still felt really weird, really strange, and what I discovered more and more over time is that the types of tests that they would be able to write if they were writing, any form of automation are tests that are really low value and incredibly expensive to maintain and keep running. And so I really didn't want that. Several years ago, I was doing some work in the Bay Area and I was spending some time with Elizabeth Hendrickson, and she was trying to turn me on to exploratory testing. And by the way, I think those ideas are great, but you don't have to be a QA person, if you will, to embrace that mindset or embrace those ideas. And so over the years, I've worked with teams that have had QA and I've worked with teams that were just developers. And constantly the teams where we just have developers who are, by the way, I'm going to use a term that would come from Elizabeth, test infected, developers who knew how to write code, who knew quality code, who knew how to test drive their code, and who also knew and understand that there are probably some in addition to writing good unit tests, I probably should run the app and, make sure things kind of work together a little bit, and that also knew how to take those small little incremental steps. 100% of the time, our quality was higher. 100% of the time, our throughput was just, dramatically higher than whenever we introduced this QA role in place. And so, in fact, I've worked with organizations where they had QA, and I would talk about this, and we would run little experiments where we'd say, okay, let's take a team or two teams, and let's try your idea. Let's try this crazy, insane idea. And every time, the quality would just go up, and and the team was happier. The throughput would just go, substantially higher. And I think it's because the handoffs are a lot of what creates miscommunication. It's a lot of what creates complexity. It creates finger pointing in some cases, right? So and so that's the one of the challenges. The second challenge is that QA role, they can only test from the outside, and they have no idea what's inside. Right? They don't see the graph of code that we see. They don't see the branches, all of the conditional logic that's in there. And so there's absolutely no way that they can ever think of thoroughly testing something. They just can't. It's not possible. And to try to interject them, we try to figure out, well, where do we interject them in the process? Do we have them, do we have the developers after they merge their code? It has to go to some place for a QA person to test. Well, now all of a sudden we no longer have continuous delivery. Now
Right.
we have to actually have environments, which is another risk, and so all of these things just kind of push me away from that idea. And so I'm working in for a client right now where there are QA, and we are in the middle of that experiment that I just mentioned. Again, I convinced them, and so I've got a couple of teams, and they're going to see the same thing. It's sad, it's
Well,
unfortunate, but for maybe for some folks who are vested in that career path, but whenever you think about it, I can't think of any other industry off the top of my head where that's common. If I were going to hire a plumber to come and install a new sink, I would expect him to turn the water on and make sure that the hot comes on when you turn the hot, and the cold comes on when you turn. Not leave and say, okay, someone's
right.
going to come and make sure the sink is right here in a little while. It just doesn't
Yeah.
happen. The person who does the work has to make sure that it works.
Well, I share the same uh sentiment and the same kind of story. So when we started mobbing in the first place, we actually had QA engineers. And actually, and so we started adding, tests to everything and started unit testing and mobbing everything. And during that time, our QA engineers had less and less to come back with every time we
Mm-hmm.
made a release, until there was nothing for long periods of time. And then we invited them to sit with us in the mob, and then gradually we had no independent QA team, and
Mm-hmm.
we retitled our QA team as software engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And uh and so I've certainly seen that, and I agree. I think also you remind me of just the kind of like Deming. I think manufacturing had the same problem, right? Before Lean and before Toyota became popular and everything like that, and on cords.
Mm-hmm.
You had this whole thing where they would test after, and that's where the red bead experiment comes from. And so like the
Right.
Deming red bead experiment is really great to run with a team,
Yeah.
and yelling at them for all the things that they got wrong, when it was just like really it was just a statistical problem, and quality up front would have helped.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it I think about is, if you can get them in a mob, then often you will have really good ideas for test ideas, test cases to write.
Mm-hmm.
But at some level, you do need a expectation of what might go wrong, right? So if you're going to write another test, hopefully you expect it to fail.
Mm-hmm.
So those sorts of things I think come to mind when you say all that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't disagree with you at all, and I think in fact it's probably a good idea for people to learn these things, but they often, I think, going back to what we were talking about organizationally before, is often the organization ends up being in the way, and the corporate antibody response and all of that stuff. So yeah, so do you have any tips and tricks around influencing organizations? Since we've come back to this topic a couple times.
So this is going to sound weird, but you know, there's this concept shift left that's really popular out there. A lot of
Right.
organizations are talking about it, and uh, wow, this is going to be out there in public. So here we go. Uh, I think that is the idea of shift left is a conduit to actually get rid of QA.
Right.
Okay,
Sure.
so and what I mean by that is once you start to try to move the QA's work or activities earlier in the process, then they have to start coordinating and collaborating with the developers. There's no other alternative, and it's very easy then to start to introduce some of the conversations around. Okay, well, here are the things that are changing. What's the best way to test these things that are changing? And you know, if you can set the concept or the idea that a lightweight test is better than a heavier weight test, you know, then we can start to have the mob, if you will, or the team start to have conversations around, well, if this change that we're making can be tested with a lightweight test, i.e., a unit test or something really lightweight, or you know, then it's better. And over time, what tends to happen as the team gets better at testing is, like you said, Chris, there's less and less and less for the QA to do, and pretty soon, you know, they realize that you know they're not doing very much. I mean, they might do a little bit of white glove once something is fully baked in production. We'll open that toggle up for a quick spell and do a little bit of a quick glance at it. But beyond that, there's no other reason for them. And to be quite honest, anybody on the team could probably do that.
Yeah. 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 And I think you're right that I think, especially if you're mobbing, because both of you kind of shared about it in reference to mobbing, at least to a degree, is that I think mobbing tends to, in a very natural and non coercive way, destroy all the silos, right? And so, and if you're mobbing, and my definition of mobbing includes retrospecting, and so then these improvements that you're talking about, Jeff, from going light, you know, from heavyweight test to lighter weight test where we can, all that kind of stuff, will leave less and less manual work to do and more automation, and it's just all kind of baked into the pipeline. And so, yeah, I think I've seen that. I've always kind of had straddled multiple spheres, you know, but QA was one of my main hats I wore back in my traditional non-mobbing, non-agile days. So I do remember being a traditional QA in some teams. But though, you know, what I've seen is when it goes well is that it's what happens to every specialist who mobs, is that they learn everything else. And the skills that they no longer need go away, and the skills they need to keep, they keep, right? Because the mob will learn and do what it needs to get done to deliver value to people in a continuous delivery fashion. So I've either seen that pattern, or I've seen where traditional QA exists for, I'll just say, organizational reasons. Like it's there. And I've also seen it where they can still exist, but they just exist outside the continuous delivery pipeline, right? And so the team, the mob, everything that's needed to get done, is there, and it's the pipeline's running, whether, what's it, continuous delivery versus continuous deployment, whatever mode you're in, one of those two. And then the traditional QA is basically just an extra layer of feedback, basically, right? And so the good version of that is they'll join the mob, or they'll be part of the mob, and then they're bringing the you know, true specialist skills that are valuable to a mob. They help teach that to the rest of the mob, right? And in the less lean way is they'll stay isolated, right? And then they'll find a few things every once in a while, or it gives an extra warm fuzzy to, you know, before a production release or something like that. I don't know. Have you ever seen it where it exists in harmony outside of a continuous delivery team or
Well,
mob.
well, let me go through and make some comments about several things you said. You know
Sure.
that whole they learn everything and they kind of just become another developer on the team. I've actually only having worked with many teams, I've only seen that work successfully once.
Oh,
Okay,
wow. Okay.
you know, and what I've seen is maybe some cases where they felt threatened, so they thought that that was the only way they were going to be able to keep their job, but they just didn't have that mindset to really pick it up, you know, or the development. And so I don't know. I'm not saying it can't happen. It can happen. I've seen it happen once. Well,
Mm,
but I've seen it, you know, not work a lot. Um, yeah. Again, having them work outside of the team, outside of the mob, you know, I'm always questioning what would they do? You know, I
yeah.
mean, what can they do? What are they doing that the team itself is not doing? You know, an extra set of eyes. Well, if they're looking at it in a different way, then maybe we need to teach the team to also incorporate that other way of looking at it and keep again that handoff, that outside, you know, work to a minimum. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. And I think outside the team, this brings a lot of baggage with it as well. You know, I mean, it opens up for finger pointing.
Yeah.
If you're working outside of the team and you're working outside of the team because you kind of got moved out because the team didn't think you were as valuable anymore, then you've got a reason to try to find out things that they're doing wrong, right? You got a reason to say, hey, look at all these bugs that I found. Whenever maybe they aren't bugs at all. I don't know. I, I'm not a for me, that the quality without QA is just what it says. Put developers and a product owner and just crank out code, put code in production every day, you know, a few times a day, and incrementally step up on the solution, letting your users inform you.
Mhm.
That's what
Mhm.
it's about. I don't
Yeah.
need QA for that.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
I've definitely seen the quote unquote finger pointing before.
Mhm.
It doesn't even happen maliciously. It just kind of happens naturally, right?
It's our defense
Because
mechanism, maybe, Austin. You know, we feel defensive, you know, I mean, or a QA person would. I don't know.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I don't know, to kind of put on my Chris Lucian hat a little bit. What is the system incentivizing you to do, right? Is your output is how many things you document and find that the other team did wrong, right? Or something.
That's
And
right.
so, um,
Yeah,
where when you're,
especially if there's a
yeah,
bonus for how many bugs you find.
yeah.
Got to get that bonus. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. And if they are a
yeah.
developer tool, then you can have the Cobra effect, right? And then they can, create their
Yeah,
own bugs to
creating.
discover. Yeah.
Well,
No,
so the word you know, the Cobra effect, the worst extrapolation of this is the
hmm.
developer gets a bonus for how many lines of code they write, and the QA engineer gets a bonus for how many bugs they find. And so the developer just writes a bunch of bugs, and then the QA, and now the
Everybody's
company's out a whole bunch of money.
everybody's happy.
Everybody's happy, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and I think, hmm. And so maybe there's a harsh reality here that we face as an industry because I used to be a traditional QA in many regards.
mhm,
Um, and I think before this conversation, because I'm biased, because I have seen it happen, but I haven't run the experiment a ton of times, right?
mhm.
Where the happy version of shift left is traditional QA, come join the mob and everything will be great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're willing to
Mhm.
learn and join the mob, everything will be great. But maybe what you're saying is that the harsh reality is that's not what's going to happen a lot of times. And is this just kind of a bummer of a message of this is the way the world is? I don't know.
So
Is there any like happy story to this, or is it just kind of it is what it is?
so I'm there might be a happy story there, okay?
Yes.
In the world that I live in, the usual outcome is that they do end up moving on.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
be honest. Not everybody in every organization is working in a you know in that fashion. There still are organizations who release software, monthly or quarterly or whatever it might be, and where they feel like they're compelled to go through some QA type process, right? And so I would guess, again, I'm guessing, I don't know, but I would guess maybe in that environment it might help to have a QA person in the mob. So
Yeah.
Well, so I think about our department right now, and I could think of at least three people that were formerly strictly QA. So I've seen it multiple times where people have made the transition.
Mhm.
Some of them before mobbing, and some of them after. And then I know of product owners that came in and became software developers from spending a lot of time with the team, as well as DevOps engineers that preferred to work in a DevOps organization
Mhm.
that then uh, switched that because they saw the inefficiencies and would rather write a little bit of code than do DevOps 100% of the time because of the flow
Mhm.
efficiency. So
Mhm.
I've seen all of those happen. So
Mhm.
I personally think that happy story is there.
Mhm.
It might be a time horizon thing because I think the people that made the successful transition had a significant amount of learning time available to them.
Mhm.
Um, Also, our former database specialist also became a software developer, and we no longer have the like database admin function in most cases, all of our cloud
Good.
cases. So
Full circle there.
yeah. um, so yeah, so I personally believe it's a time horizon thing. Like and a lot of companies don't provide dedicated learning time to their engineers, and so.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe the first thing I would just ask is like how much time does that person actually realistically have to make a transition where we're talking about a role that we normally hire for that has a 4-year degree behind it because there is some aspect of that and the practical skills are going to be smaller than a 4-year degree, but there is like a
Mhm.
significant leap that we're asking them to make, right?
Good.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we are getting a little close on time, but we do have a few minutes left. It would be
Yeah.
fun to hear your coffee and croissants, at
Mhm.
least soundbite, hot take here.
So, little background, and maybe you can cut this out if you want to. I don't know, but my wife's family in Europe own a chain of coffee stores,
Hmm.
and and coffee is really important to me. I've been making European style, espresso based
Yeah.
coffees for a few decades, and so my wife and I had lots of conversations around, as we get closer to retirement, it might be nice just to have like a little coffee shop. That would be a great thing to happen.
Cool.
Now,
Nice.
we were always thinking that's 10 years away, that's 15 years away, that's out there sometime. And then COVID hit, and COVID caused a lot of people to rethink a lot of things. And in the food services industry, COVID also put a lot of companies out of business. And so we, at the end of COVID, went out and bought an existing bakery and cafe,
Wow.
and kind of jumped headfirst into the business. And then, because we like a lot of pain, we built out and started a second location. And so we have now 24 employees across the two locations. It's quite the little operation. But what it allowed me to do is take so many of these ideas that I've been, teaching folks and helping people learn for a few decades now in the software field, and try to apply them directly to something that's very different. And we think, well, lean applies everywhere, and yeah, it does. But my oh my, did I have a lot of learnings along the way. So let me tell you the two biggest learnings, I guess.
Nice.
The biggest learning I had is that the people mean everything. The people mean everything. And we they're in that particular industry, it's so different in the software development industry in that it's fairly common for people to scream and yell at their employees because they're low paid often. And so we started taking a very different approach, and we were very particular about who we hired. And now we have people that have been with us since the beginning, and they love working there, and I can't stress how much that matters. I didn't realize that in the software world because, you know, I sometimes get a big head and I think, well, I could teach any developer to write good code, you know, or I could do this or I could do that. But it really, really matters. And now I've had to go back and really think about how do I now take the things that I've learned at the store and apply it back to the software development field. The other thing that I've learned a lot about is the concepts of supply chain and the concepts of just in time that we bring from Lean that we always try to apply to software. And I've learned how it doesn't work as smoothly as we might think in our head sometimes. You know,
Yeah.
and how to step back and really assess the risk of the supply chain, how to assess the risk of just in time, and let me give you some examples. All
Nice.
of my suppliers, I have backups, and I'll give you a great example. So I go through about 400 liters of milk a week at one of my stores. Okay, lattes, cappuccino. You know, we're pretty high volume there. Yeah, around 400 or 500 liters a week. And if I run out of milk, I can't serve coffees, right? So and I had a great steady supplier going. It just so happened that one of the grocery store chains in the Toronto area, the workers went on strike and they were closed for like a month and a half while their workers were negotiating and such. And finally, the news came on that that workers have reached an agreement. The grocery stores are opening up again. I'm like, great. It didn't impact me. I don't buy anything from grocery stores, right?
Yeah.
Except the next delivery, the milk guy comes in and says, "I've got nothing for you." I'm like, what? Yeah, I'm sorry. All of the milk we had in the warehouses went to restart stock all of the grocery stores.
Yeah.
And so I scrambled, I found a place where I could get it. But that just sort of fundamentally broke some of the core ideas that I had, or you know, idealized ideas of how lean should work. You know, you've got a supplier and you know, just in time and so forth. And so I all of a sudden realized that just in time works whenever you have a very, very consistent,
Right.
repeatable delivery that where there's no risk. And if there's any form of a risk, just in time needs to be adjusted a bit. So anyway, it's been a little bit of a journey for me trying to go through and trying to apply the ideas, trying to apply the concepts, and learning things that haven't worked well, and then having that influence my ideas around software delivery and straddling the two.
I love it.
And so, go
There was
ahead,
so
Chris.
much that had happened around the chip shortages. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, from being with a hardware manufacturer, I certainly experienced very
Mm-hmm.
similar things with what you were replying to with milk. But
Mm-hmm.
we are at time, and so I just wanted to give you a chance to plug or share anything before we signed off here.
Um, well, sure. I'm going to talk about my latest little hobby project.
Okay.
Okay, if that's okay. I don't know if
Yeah, yeah,
that's
go ahead.
appropriate or not.
That sounds
So
great.
Austin mentioned that he watched my little Elixir series that I did with Uncle Bob.
Yeah.
Elixir is what a language. You know, I'm surprised it's not used more out there because it's so powerful. Um, I have been playing with Elixir for a long time. I have a house full of little gadgets, hardware like gadgets that I built with it. But the latest one is merging my love for programming and my love for coffee.
Okay.
So
Nice.
so I bought a 15-year-old coffee machine, espresso machine. It is like a tank. It is solid as can be and has absolutely no modern features whatsoever. It to make good coffee with it, you have to really know coffee. You have to fuss with it constantly. It's like maybe an old Ferrari, right? So and I convinced my son to buy the same model. And we are now using Elixir, using Nerves, using Raspberry Pis. we're in the process of going through and adding all of these fun features. So we're going to open source this. We're going to put it out there for anybody that wants to go through the process.
Cool.
I think my son's going to have a blog series where he's going to write about it. But we're taking an old piece of hardware and we're making it modern and pretty and shiny. And so there you go. That's a fun little project
All
I have
right.
going on. I don't know, Austin or Chris, if this is what you usually have people in the show with,
It's fantastic.
in the show notes, I can put a link to the GitHub if anyone wants to take a look at it, watch it, and it's pretty cool. If you haven't looked at the Nerves project, which is all about running Elixir on embedded devices, I would highly recommend it. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing. It's a perfect share, by the way.
All right.
To our audience, if you want a special paradox to share with people, Cheezy can go to a lean coffee and talk about lean coffee, but not mean lean coffee. So that's really good. So like, subscribe, comment, and share, and we will see you all next time. Cheezy, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
All right, thank you.